Warm greetings. Welcome to Wednesdays for Water. We are a citizens collective aiming to walk and talk water. We try to meet every week and connect people with various water worries and wisdoms. And in the process, we wish to curate future water warriors. The way we talk about trivial things for hours, water too needs walking and talking to address the rising water distresses. The way Wednesdays for Water is conceptualized as a prime time show, it wishes to make water everybody's business. The idea of the series was conceptualized in August 2020, and by the end of the year, the team and the structure was pretty much in shape. We started in April 2021 with Dr. Rajendra Singh's inaugural speech. We wish to bring science and society together, and therefore we try to bring in every session either a policymaker or practitioner and a researcher or academician. We also think that future generation is crucial and therefore they have presence in each session. We are going stronger with every week now with session on either quiz, couple of weeks of hard talks and a week of soft session of art and music. There is a simple structure for each session of quiz, hard session and soft session which are moderated by the core team member. Here is a glimpse of what we call as hard sessions and soft sessions. Besides walking and talking water worries and wisdoms collectively, we see this as a platform to cross-connect and expand our network and explore possible collaborations. We are also making notes to publish both scientific and non-scientific work. Here is a glimpse of some of our writings. You may reach us through email, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also look at our website www.w4w.in. We look forward to your suggestions and comments to make the series more meaningful and engaging. And meanwhile, we hope that you appreciate today's session.
Good evening and namaste everyone. On behalf of the Wednesdays for Water team and the partnering organizations, EDC Ahmedabad, TIS, Wiki, FluxGen, Counterview, and the Terry School of Advanced Studies, I, Fawzia, welcome all of you to the webinar on gender, water, and climate change. Wednesdays for Water was instituted in April 2021 with the objective to engage in conversation with water experts, grassroots practitioners, policymakers, and youth to explore the complex intertwined issues associated with water and explore possible solutions. Today in our discussion, we are trying to explore the SDGs 5, Gender Equality, SDG6, which is Clean Water and Sanitation, and SDG 13, which is on climate action and how they cross-cut with each other, as well as with other 14 SDGs. Now, in fact, let's look at a few statistics which are there on these three things, gender, water, and climate change, which is our topic today. So India slipped 28 places to rank 140 among 156 countries in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report 2021. So thus it became the third worst performer in South Asia. India ranks 7th in the Global Climate Risk Index 2021, which is brought out by German Watch. Two coastal cities of India, Kolkata and Chennai, rank among the top 10 cities vulnerable to climate change, both in terms of its population and in fact assets as well. And we have seen the cyclone hitting these places and havoc being created because of extreme weather events. The Hindu Kush Himalayan region, we also refer to it as the third pole, is considered to be a climate change hotspot. We all know that climate change manifests itself primarily through changes in the water cycle. In 2018, Niti Aayog, in their Composite Water Management Index report, declared that India is suffering from the worst water crisis in its history, and millions of lives and livelihoods are under threat. In 2019, the Aqueduct Water Risk Atlas was released, and India again was placed at the 13th position among the world's 17 extremely water-stressed countries. CEW recently brought out a report where they said nearly 68% of Indian districts have been facing droughts and drought-like situations. Now, when we superimpose all these three looming crises in India and view it from a gendered lens, we see that vulnerable people, they could be men, women, or from the third gender alike, suffer more from impacts of climate change like storms, floods, and heat waves than the resilient ones who have greater fallback mechanisms. And if you look at the statistics of the extreme weather events as well, you would see that probably women, elderly, children have been worst affected amongst the lot. To discuss this very, very intricate problem that is there, we are honored to have with us Professor Vishal Narain, who is from MDI Gurgaon. He has more than 2 decades of experience in the field of gender, water, and climate change. We have Ms. Chandni Bedi, a passionate grassroots practitioner from Navjyoti Foundation, and a discussant, Ms. Vinni Munjal from Grand Thornton, Bharat, who is working as a water consultant with the Haryana Water Resources Authority. So I would first like to invite Vishal, who is a professor of public policy and governance at Management Development Institute, Gurgaon. He holds a PhD from Wageningen University, the Netherlands. His academic interests are in the interdisciplinary analysis of public policy, processes and institutions, water governance, gender rights and equity issues in water management, peri-urban issues, and adaptation and vulnerability to climate change. Vishal, we view issues from the lenses that we wear, and we often assume that technical interventions can actually correct everything, all the imbalances in the access to water. And the moment we say that, okay, water is there, or there's a lot of water that is to be seen, that means everybody has access to water. We really invite you to focus on this intersectionality that is there, and also to share your thoughts on the topic and the significance of capturing these gender narratives. So over to you, Vishal.
Okay. Well, thank you, Fawzia, very much. Pleasure to be with this group. Thank you so much for the invite. And when I received the invite for this Wednesdays for Water series, Fawzia said that she wanted me to look at water, gender, and climate change in a peri-urban context. Yeah. So what I've done is I have trying to bring in a perspective on gender, water, and climate change in a peri-urban sense, in a peri-urban context. And then towards the end, I'll talk a bit more generally about how we look at water, gender, and climate change and these relationships. So just give me a moment to share my screen. Yeah. Yes, so I hope you can see my screen now. Yes? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So what I've done is I have structured my talk to focus on 6 questions. So 1, why talk about gender in the context of climate change? What is the value of looking at climate change and the impacts of climate change through a gendered lens? What are peri-urban spaces? Why should we think about them? Why think of peri-urban water security in a context of climate change? What is a gender change nexus in the peri-urban interface? And I assume that a large number of audience today is students. So then what does this mean for students of gender, water, and climate change? And I'll conclude with some thoughts on what could be a way forward. So when we look at the gender dimensions of climate change, now I would like to start with a word that is very common in the climate change discourse, which is vulnerability. So vulnerability, adaptation, resilience, coping capacity, these words constitute the language of climate change. And if you look at how the word vulnerability came up, it was basically, the term came up basically to capture the socially differentiated nature of the susceptibility to harm. So when climate change is experienced, when the impacts of climate change are experienced, they don't mean the same thing for everybody. And the term vulnerability really draws attention to the socially differentiated nature of the susceptibility to harm. And one way that we conceptualize vulnerability, and one way that we deconstruct or unpack the notion of vulnerability, is through exposure, sensitivity, and coping capacity. And when you look at these terms carefully, when you try to unpack what these words mean and apply even common sense without reading the literature on gender or climate change, you know that all these aspects of exposure, sensitivity, and coping capacity are gendered, which means that they are different for men and women. So if you look at exposure, so the gender-based division of labor at home and outside is very instrumental in shaping your exposure. So what men and women do in the fields, how much time they spend at home, how much time they spend outside the home are all social constructs. And this is shaped by a gender-based division of labor. So exposure to the impacts of climate change is gendered. When we talk about coping capacity, we talk about the ability of people to deal with the negative impacts of climate change. And when you deconstruct the notion of coping capacity, we say that it's basically about access to natural resources, or natural capital, human capital, social capital, physical capital, and financial capital. Natural capital is access to natural resources like land, water, forests. Human capital are your skills, your level of education, literacy, professional skills, professional background. Social capital is your social relationships, networks, friendships, ties. Physical capital are all your assets, agricultural tools, implements. And financial capital is access to finance, to money in a bank, your ability to take credit, your ability to take a loan. And when you look at these carefully, you find that access to all of these are also gendered. Access to natural resources is gendered. Social capital is highly gendered because men and women differ in the way that they are part of social groups and in the way that they engage with social networks. And so when you look at coping capacity carefully, you find that coping capacity is strongly gendered and sensitivity is gendered because of some combination of the above. So when you look at the concept of vulnerability, when you deconstruct the notion of vulnerability, you find that vulnerability is highly gendered. And therefore, it is not surprising that many studies show that mortality rates for women are higher than those for men in the case of climate-induced disasters, for example, floods and many other disasters that Fawzia just spoke about. And many studies show that worldwide, more women, there are more female fatalities, there are more women fatalities in disasters than there are male fatalities. And studies show that it is because of the social norms, it is because of the social construct of gender that women are disadvantaged. This could be because of dressing norms, because women are poorly covered by early warning systems, because of the responsibilities that women have at home, when disasters strike, right? So because of these social norms, and many studies show, of course, that women are biologically stronger than men in many ways. And if you look at demographic data worldwide, you find that life expectancies for women are higher than life expectancies for men in most nations. But it is a social construct, it is the social disadvantages that enhance the vulnerability of women. And when you look at vulnerability from a gendered lens, it is these kinds of differences that you find between men and women. So let me turn now to some talk about peri-urban spaces, a subject on which I've been working very closely for many years, a subject on which the literature has grown quite phenomenally in the last 2 decades. So peri-urban is a very loosely used term, but broadly, when we talk of peri-urban, we're referring to spaces at the periphery of cities, at the border of cities. More analytically, the word peri-urban is used to describe a process that captures the changing nature of rural-urban links and interactions. Peri-urban spaces are highly heterogeneous in terms of social composition, economic activities, cutting across both rural and urban activities. It's a space in transition, and peri-urban spaces are growing rapidly in extent and importance in the global south. So when we look at water insecurity in peri-urban spaces, we find that it's really a situation of what you call double exposure. It's a term that Leishenko and O'Brien used when they first started writing about climate change and vulnerability to climate change. So on the one hand, peri-urban spaces, the areas, the spaces bordering cities face threats on their water sources from urban expansion. So this takes many forms. So for instance, water flowing from rural to urban areas through tankers. And now many studies in cities like Chennai, for instance, draw a lot of attention to the water tanker economy. There's growing competition for groundwater. So gated communities, urban high-rises start appropriating the groundwater that was earlier used for agriculture, and small marginal farmers are no longer able to compete for groundwater with modern high rises that come up in their vicinity. And of course, there's huge literature now on acquisition of village commons like tanks, lakes, ponds. And we look at Hyderabad, Bangalore, Gurgaon, how these cities have grown by acquiring or by encroaching the water bodies of the neighboring villages, of the neighboring rural areas. So on the one hand, the water sources of peri-urban spaces are under threat from urban expansion, and at the same time, these effects are aggravated by climate change through changing precipitation patterns, change in the season distribution of rainfall, and the timing and the duration and the intensity of seasons. So what does peri-urbanization mean for gender relations? Now, one of the things to understand in talking of peri-urban spaces is how the transforming relationships between rural and urban areas impact gender relations. Yes, and I'll draw on a few instances, a few anecdotes from my own research. One of the important things to understand that the most basic driver of change in peri-urban spaces is land use change. And when land use changes, say when land moves out from agriculture into industry, recreation, residential areas, a lot of other changes follow. And very often these land use changes, trigger off occupational diversification that often causes men either to migrate to the city, or they may not migrate to the city, but they may be moving to and fro on a daily basis. They may be commuting to the city for work. Yeah, and often with this land use change and occupational diversification and men moving away from the rural areas to the cities, this is associated with what we call the feminization of agriculture, and it increases the responsibilities of women on the farms and at home. And often this is just a feminization of agricultural labor, meaning that even though men may move away from the village, they continue to acquire control and authority over the agrarian resources, even though women get more involved in the labor. Now, what does this mean for water? So what this means for water, and I saw in one of my research studies, is that this is often associated with changing gender relations around water. Now, we assume that in all societies, women collect water, and that's a normal picture we have of women carrying pots and pots of water on their heads. That's a picture that we see on the cover of annual reports of NGOs or funding bodies. But when I was working in this village called Siddharthpur, I found that in the upper caste families, women did not go out to collect water. It was men who used to go out to collect water. But when with land use change, with land acquisition, with the men moving out to the city and commuting daily to the city to work, women would not wait for the men to come back to collect water. And women also from the upper caste families started going out to collect water. And the expression that they said was "Parda phat gaya hai," means the veil has been removed. So this is one thing to look at, how peri-urbanization, how land use change brings about a transformation in gender relations, in the relative roles and responsibilities of men and women around water. The other way to look at this is to look at how the water footprint of urban expansion is borne by peri-urban spaces and what kind of implications that has for gender relations. So when I was doing field work in a village called Budhera a few years ago, I learned that when the city of Gurgaon was expanding and planning authorities decided to augment the urban water infrastructure of the city, they had to build a water treatment plant. And this water treatment plant was built by acquiring the grazing lands of the village called Budhera. And Budhera was a highly livestock dependent village. Now, what happened was that when the grazing lands were gone, this caused households to switch from grazing to stall feeding. And in this part of the country, the task of taking livestock out to graze is traditionally the responsibility of men or of professional herders in the village. But when the grazing lands are gone and the households had to switch from grazing to stall feeding, it meant that fodder had to be collected and brought home. So while taking the cattle out to graze was the responsibility of men or professional herders, collecting fodder was the responsibility of women. And that is how it increased the workload of women around natural resource collection. So this is very important to understand how these efforts at getting the city to expand, at meeting the infrastructure requirements of city have unintended consequences on gender relations, on the relative roles and responsibilities of men and women around natural resources. So this is an indirect way in which the water footprint of urban expansion is born by peri-urban spaces and has impacts on gender relations. From my work in Mukteshwar, I found that there was a very unique climate change, gender and water nexus in the peri-urban. And many of you would have heard of Mukteshwar. You may have been to Mukteshwar. It's a very scenic place. At least it was like that 2 or 3 years ago when I did my field work. And a lot of the land in Mukteshwar is being acquired for building hotels, tourist complexes, and weekend cottages for the urban elite. And what the way the land use change happens is by acquiring the prime lands located near springs, which have historically been managed as common property resources by social groups. And in this process of land use change, as the land access was lost, so was the access to water. So on the one hand, there was land use change driving the loss of access to springs. On the other hand, there were climatic changes represented in reduced snowmelt and precipitation, which reduced the recharge in springs. Yeah, so when you look at peri-urban spaces, urbanization and climate change together present a layering of stresses on water, right? And at the same time, what had happened in the region was that there had been a switch from grains to fruits and vegetables. So when you grow grains, you know, the harvest residue often serves as fodder. So the switch in cropping choices from grains to fruits and vegetables, mainly to meet the urban markets, and the cordoning of a preserved forest increase women's responsibilities in fodder collection. So what I'm trying to say is that together, these processes of urbanization and climate change interact in a way that may increase women's responsibilities in natural resource collection, and reduce communities' access to natural resources. So one needs this kind of a locally nuanced, locally contextualized understanding of how climate change and urbanization together intersect intersect and alter or shape access to natural resources. Okay, so what does this mean for students and youth interested in gender, water, and climate change? So how does one operationalize this? So if you're a student trying to understand this nexus, what does all this mean? So one is that gender is an important entry point to understand social differentiation. So we don't study gender simply because we're interested in gender. We study gender because it's one of the most basic access of social differentiation. And if you want to understand how equity, inequity, equality, inequality are experienced in society, gender is an important conceptual entry point. Yes. Now, of course, social science tends to get abstract, and social scientists may want to talk in abstractions. But when you operationalize a gender analysis, you always start by asking the who question. So who does what? Who does what in the fields? Who does what on the farms? Who does what at home? Right? And something I learned from my own experience is do not assume gender roles. They are contextual. So when you start looking at gender, you have to start with a blank slate, because it's a highly contextual thing. What is a man's domain in one society is a woman's domain in another society, right? What is a man is a woman's domain at another point in time. Yes, so never assume gender roles. They are contextual, and start with an open slate. Start by asking the who question: who does what? Who does the plowing? Who does the irrigation? Who does the harvesting? Right? Do not assume gender roles. They are contextual, and then look at intersectionalities. Women are not a homogeneous soul, for that matter, nor are men. So gender analysis doesn't stop at looking at the differences between men and women. I'm not talking at the moment now of the third gender. I've not brought that into my frame of analysis, but look at intersectionalities. Look at how gender intersects with other axes of social differentiation. So upper caste women versus lower caste women, upper caste women versus lower caste men. So caste, class, race, color of skin, age, marital status, whether you're a widow, you're married, or you're single. Yeah, so always start with the who question and look at intersectionalities. And then ask yourself, what is going on here? How is the interface of rural and urban areas changing? What does this mean for changing access to water and other natural resources? And how is this further impacted by climate change? And through the prism of intersectionality, what does this mean for gender relations? So when you look at gender relations, you look at the relative roles and responsibilities of men and women. How are gender relations changing around natural resources, on the fields, and at home? So what would be some thoughts on our way forward? So as I said, that I really use a peri-urban context to talk about the relationships between gender, water, and climate change. And I did cite some anecdotal evidence from my own research, but to my mind, the gender dimensions of peri-urban spaces are relatively understudied and need more academic attention. Peri-urban is a space where formal policy state intervention is not enough. It's a very messy space. It's very difficult. It's a strong assumption to assume that formal laws, policies, governance structures will solve those problems. You need very strong participation of NGOs, civil society organizations, academics, and researchers. And it's very nice that Chandni is here, to give that perspective. Gender is about men and women. It's not just about women. So I think we need more men, to talk about gender, to write about gender, to teach gender, to research gender. Yes. And finally, the pandemic has provided one more layer of stresses, making the already complex interactions even more complicated. And perhaps that's something that needs to be still better understood. And hopefully, if we don't have a third wave of the pandemic, we can be back in the field and investigating these issues further. So on that note, I will stop and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Vishal. I think you brought out a lot of dimensions to this topic. Of course, bringing out the youth dimension, the other day also we were talking about that if we're looking at sustainable development, then youth has to be at the center of it. And probably, you covered that dimension as well. Peri-urban, as you rightly pointed out, that they are actually the recipients of a lot of issues, a lot of water-related problems that we generate. The other day we had a talk on rural-urban continuum, and we were looking at urban water, and wherein we discussed at length about how the wastewater that is generated in the urban area lands up in the rural area, and how in the peri-urban and the rural area. Also the expansion, how we encroach upon the water bodies and the water resources to expand cities. So that we actually covered at length. You brought about the Mukteshwar thing. So we have the Niti Aayog report that talks about 50% of the springs, either becoming seasonal or drying up completely. Yeah. And women or men or whosoever has the road to collect water, now they are required to travel longer distances and sometimes on those steep slopes. So it becomes very bad. It's literally a backbreaking exercise that is there. The third thing, and thank you, you started with giving the concept of exposure sensitivity and coping capacity. So I will draw from there and then like to invite Chandni, because when we look at this equation of disaster, or when we look at climate change and the equation of disaster, the capacity to cope, in the equation comes in the denominator. So when we are able to work on a denominator better, the risk of people getting impacted by the disaster can be reduced. So Chandni is Director Rural Management and Training Institute at Navjyoti Foundation. She brings with her 18 years of experience with a non-governmental organization. Delhi University topper and a postgraduate in environment management. She has executed several village development projects at the grassroots level. The one that struck a chord with me for the first time, and I started to interact with Chandni probably even more than I used to do before, was her Pani Police initiative, which she did in a village in Sona. I'm sure she would talk about it. She's pursuing a PhD from Terry School of Advanced Studies. She's a member of Widow Cell Committee in District Administration of Gurgaon. She was honored with the Samarpan Award for her exemplary work in the social sector and has also been awarded the Dainik Jagran for her work in women empowerment. Over to you, Chandni, because I know you've been working extensively on building resilience in communities or probably strengthening or working on the coping mechanisms. So would request you to share your work with the audience.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fawzia ma'am. Thank you for inviting me. And it's also a privilege to share this platform with Vishal Narain sir, because I've been his student and I've learned a lot from him on water governance and gender. And I always look forward to attending his sessions, and so is it was today. So yeah, I'll share my screen, and yes, I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, Chan, it's
okay, great. So yeah, I completely agree with what Vishal sir said, that, you know, when we talk about gender, we usually portray the picture something like what is seen here in my slide as well, that women dried up wells, or women, you know, traveling longer distances to fetch water. No doubt, women are impacted severely by the by climate changes. But we, in the process, what we have been discussing so far, that we cannot ignore men who also get impacted. Their livelihood gets impacted, those who are dependent on agriculture or pottery and others. The impact may be disproportionate. Women may be more vulnerable, but the fact is that we cannot look this into in isolation. And of course, Fawzia ma'am brought into the perspective of third gender as well. So here I am going to share what worked for us and what did not work for us. So what have been our learnings and what have been our successes during this course of transformation while working in the space of gender, water and climate change. So we started on water projects way back in 2001. And we organized a Mahapanchayat in Sona block in district Gurugram, where we're working in the villages to conserve water, to sensitize the panchayat. And this session was facilitated by our founder, Dr. Chandni Bedi ma'am. And what we found was there was no woman who had attended that Mahapanchayat. So it was either the men or the so-called Sarpanch Patis. So we thought, and rightly, one of the reasons was because they were the decision makers. So what we started doing, we thought that we have to, with the intent to bring women into this whole process of water management, and bringing women as decision makers, we started mobilizing them. But very soon we realized that it's not that easy. Women had no time; they were caregivers. And we realized that they needed to be empowered first economically. They had no clues, and they were not interested in what we were talking about: check dams, gated structures, gully plugging, etc. So we started organizing women into self-help groups to empower them socially as well as economically, so that they could start some kind of savings to begin with. And then in 2005, you all are aware, there was this government scheme, Accelerated Rural Water Supply, where water reached the doorsteps of all households. And those who have been left out, we have a new scheme by the government, which is reaching out to the left out sections, Har Ghar Jal. But what we also started witnessing was that because of the climate change, there were changes in the rainfall patterns, changes in the precipitation. The johars, which are the ponds, they started drying up. And because in Gurugram district, we are completely dependent on the groundwater, so there were submersibles installed in the villages so that pipelines could be attached to it, and people can access water at their doorsteps. So in the process, what started happening was that groundwater tables started depleting. So hence the extraction was more than the water that was being recharged into the ground. And then the next 5 years, we started focusing on women completely, bringing them to the forefront. We started some interventions around economic activities. We empowered them socially. They played leadership roles in water management. What Fawzia ma'am rightly pointed out, we organized women into Pani Police so that they can actually manage the water, not just in their households, but also in the neighborhood community. So in the whole process, the capacities of these women improved, but the decisions were still not completely with them, which in addition to the good work that they were doing, it started adding to their workload. And hence we decided to take a step back, because we all know that Haryana is a patriarchal society. And we realized that gender issues cannot be looked into isolation. There are social relations that exist, which Vishal sir pointed out, both within their families, at the household level, and within the society. And he also mentioned about the multifaceted issues like caste, socioeconomic status, the age groups. So we realized that men, even children, they were one of the key stakeholders, and these issues cannot be ignored. So we had to work while balancing everybody, while co-opting everybody and balancing the inclusion. So what we did, we started paying attention to these 5 P's. Now, these 5 P's were perception to the climate-induced changes. We started asking them, how do they perceive these climate changes? Both men as well as women. What were their positions? What were their roles and power relations that existed in the society? What were their priorities in responding to address those changes that were happening due to climate change in the context of water? We also try to analyze what is their potential, what are their capabilities, what are their capacities or strengths, and then the preferences for adaptation strategies. So I mentioned about that men and women, they have different coping mechanisms as well. So what were their preferences? And this is what we found. When we talk about perceptions, when we reached out to women, they said there was no water for them for domestic needs. Now, this was the statement by the ones who belong to the lower caste, because even if the water was provided at the doorsteps, it was not able to reach out to the ones belonging to the lower caste. On the other hand, the upper caste ones had a privilege and had access to pipeline water, and there was a wastage of water. So within the same gender, we could see how the caste issues came into the picture. And they also said that cultural norms like Johar Puja has finished, and there's no, they have no ponds for Johar Puja. On the other hand, the men, they were more focused on subsistence, on livelihood. They said there was no water for agriculture or cattle, and ponds had dried up, because of which there were no recreational spaces left for them. And they clearly remember that, there was enough water in ponds that they could swim and they could enjoy in the ponds, which no more existed for them. When we talked about position, well, we all know that women are the caregivers. In Haryana, they are restricted to home. They are not allowed to step out. They have to take care of the families, the elders and the children, while the men were the bread earners. There was no access to information as far as women were concerned. They had no access to cellular phones. They were not mobile, and they also did not have access to resources. Similarly, in contrast, the men, they had access to information, they were mobile, and they had resources. As far as priorities was concerned, women were more focused, that because specifically for the women belonging to the lower caste, that they were more engaged in effective management of water. They needed to store water, to take care of their domestic work. And while the women from the higher caste who had pointed out that they cannot do Johar Puja, they shifted their puja, they started worshipping taps instead of ponds. And the men, for them, the priorities shifted to alternate livelihoods. They started getting into private jobs or drivers, and the wastewater, they started diverting wastewater to the ponds, the wastewater from the households. When we talk about potential, we realized that women in Haryana, they were more comfortable doing stitching, embroidery, or cattle rearing, whereas men, they were more mobile. They had access to local government information. They had good networking skills. And preferences, of course, women, they preferred income generation activities. They wanted to get empowered economically, but something that would fetch them income sitting at home, whereas men, they were more interested in the development projects for villages. Now, within this framework, we had our solutions. For example, if the women, they were restricted to home, and they were comfortable in stitching and embroidery, we started upskilling them. We started basic stitching courses right at the doorsteps. And similarly, if they did not have access to information, then we started a lot of social awareness programs, connected them with a lot of social welfare schemes. And if they did not have access to resources, microcredit program was one of the interventions, like self-help groups that I shared. And very recently, so when we talk of income generation for women, I'll be talking about one of our projects, Unnati, how women have now, they're making handcrafted products and selling their products, beautiful products online, sitting at home. And recently, we also did a pilot project called Project Move in association with one of our partner organizations. This was just a pilot project where women sitting at home, they can connect with the veterinary doctors, they can sell their cattle and get benefited, or they can sell feed, the nutritious feed sitting at home. So within this framework were our answers. While the men who wanted development projects for villages, we of course had a plan for them as well. But in the whole process, we started taking men along with us. There were a lot of sensitization programs, awareness programs that we did with both men as well as women. If women talked about Johar Pujan, then we also linked them to their traditional norms, their traditional cultures, why Johar Pujan was in place. What did it mean for the ancestors? Why did they value water or ponds, or why Dev Banis existed? So these were some of the programs, these were some of the interventions that we brought out within that framework. Microcredit program, digital literacy, skill enhancement, livelihood opportunities in the villages itself, access to government social welfare schemes, awareness sensitization programs, and community development programs. Now, when we worked on the community development program, we were very clear that we need to involve both men and women across all age groups, across all caste and socioeconomic status, right at the planning stage. Now, that was our biggest learning. And we use design thinking approach to actually work on this. So as we all know, that design thinking approach, it involves empathizing with the community, empathizing with both men, women. Then we had separate focus group meetings with them. We defined what their problems were. We defined, we brainstormed on the ideas, what they want, and we created a model. We went back to them with the model to understand whether we were thinking on the right path or not, or whether they wanted something else, there were changes required, and then we implemented that model. And it is, again, an iterative process. We work in phases. Just to give you a glimpse how we involved women. So this is a small snippet of video clip of village Gari Bazitpur, and you can see that right at the planning stage, when we created a model, there was bride Johar, which people had, the panchayat and the community had diverted wastewater to this Johar or pond, and there was a barren piece of land. So we wanted to revive that pond, and we wanted to create that piece into the barren piece into green space. So we had this meeting with the women across all age groups, across all socioeconomic status, and they were the ones who actually designed their park and told us what is it that they want. So while women wanted a place for the satsang where they could get together, the young women wanted a place where the children could play safely. So they wanted a space which was not very close to the pond. And similarly, the youth, they also participated actively in the planning stage, and they wanted a playing area for them, a volleyball court for themselves. The elders wanted benches in the park, in that green space. And this is how this model was created, and the whole design was done by the community themselves across all age groups and economic status, social economic status. And you can see that the result of that. This is the 3-pond system that we created, we developed in Garibazatpur with the support of the community. You can see children playing in the park, you can see youth playing volleyball, you can see the women enjoying themselves in that dome structure, which is again an eco-friendly dome, which was developed there. But the most important thing was that because they were involved in the planning stage on this issue of water, climate change, they took the ownership of their area. So they are the ones now who take care of these structures that were developed. They do the cleaning of the ponds regularly. They maintain their own parks. So that is what has really worked for us when we have co-opted everyone. And till date, we have constructed check dams, gate structures, gully plugs, done rain rooftop harvesting in government schools, because of which we have been able to create an annual we have been able to create annual water recharge potential of 2.84 lakhs kiloliters, and 45,725 square meter of school areas prevented from waterlogging, 70,000 square meter of areas converted into green spaces, and more than 44,000 people have been impacted. But our strength is those 250 plus volunteers who are actually making the difference. Talking about women, now these are the products that the women now make. Now, because they had more time, they did not have to go outside to fetch water. The water was available at the doorsteps. They had more time to get into income generation actors. So from savings, they started generating for themselves. And you can also see they wanted work right at the doorstep. So we reached out to the Sarpanch, we reached out to the community. And for the first time, the Chopal, which is again a gendered space, was provided to women for these livelihood opportunities. So you can see in this picture, this is village Damdama, where women are making shirts for Sonalika International Tractors, the building very next to Teddy School of Advanced Studies. So if you see employees wearing shirts, so they are made by women from these villages. And not only that, they do it in a very sustainable manner. So all the leftover fabrics are collected from all the production units that we have in the villages. And you can see these nice pencil tops, the dolls, which are made out of those leftover fabrics. And also the high-end products that you can see, like bedspreads, comforters, and quilts. Men, on the other hand, they started, they formed their own community-based organizations because they were sensitized towards the issue of water and climate change. They started taking ownership. And you can see this pond. This is village Kerala in Sona block. It has been completely revived by the youth group, which was formed. And not just, so because they had their networking skills, they reached out to people, they reached out to the corporates, to the donors to get funding, and they revived this pond. And they also wanted recreational spaces. So if you can see in the picture that how they are creating those beautiful paths for walking. So this work is still under process. This was a very recent picture, but this is how we harnessed their strengths and we worked on their strengths. And very recently, there was a visit by Shri Ashok Kumarji, Mission Director, National Water Mission, to our project sites. And this is village Sejavas, where we all know that, women, they are not accepted in the sense that men do not tie turban on the heads of women. But for the first time, the elders and the youth of this village broke the gender stereotype in recognition of the women who were working in their villages on water and climate change. The below picture, you can see that these are the women who were actually constructed check dam. The check dam that we had constructed in this village, 50% contribution was by these women. And they are also involved in Shramdan, cleaning the ponds. So this turban was actually a representation. It was a representation and symbolic of an honor to these women who were working on water and climate change. So this is something that I always like, which I learned from Vishal sir, and he used to say that we need to navigate our ways amid social and power relations. So what I presented here is how do we navigate our ways amid social and power relations. So that has been our learnings and our successes in the process in this journey of transformation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chandni. This was like super inspiring, and so happy to see large number of initiatives. And on that beautiful rug that you showed me, I could see a patch of my dining table mat that I picked up from your place. And that's the proof that is there, that there is no piece of cloth that is getting wasted also. So it's upskilling women, but it's also, trying to upscale whatever we thought was waste, trying to make it a resource. So that was amazing. Breaking stereotypes, the turban, that was how beautiful it was to see the village elderly tying turban there. And of course, you spoke about the structural barriers and other aspects as well, which you highlighted, but how you were able to really bring about a social transformation through continual engagement with all gender types. So that's very important. And at the same time, how important it is to look at what beneficiary wants or what the end user wants. What is it? So even that participatory village action plan or pond rejuvenation plan that you did, that's also a lesson for everyone to know. While the government schemes do talk about it, but they really don't go into that detail. So herein, that was again great. A lot of things that I can go on and on. But I see Vinny smiling there. So I have a discussant with me today, Vinni Munjal. Vinni Munjal is she actually graduated from Terry School of Advanced Studies in 2020 amidst, was it 20, Vinny? Amidst the pandemic, and and she did her MTech Water Resources Engineering and Management. She worked with UNDP for a year as a water consultant, and then from there now she has moved on to work with Haryana Water Management Authority, but I would really like to highlight her work when she was at UNDP. She has been instrumental in documenting large number of women's stories, and they have compiled a report and they released it some time ago. So I'll request Vinny to throw some light on that report. And how did you find gender cross-cutting with water? Because a lot of women took leadership position when it came to managing water. And also maybe synthesize what the speakers said and ask them a few questions. Huh? Thank you.
Very good evening to everyone, and thank you, Professor Fawzia, for the opportunity to participate in the session today. I'm deeply honored to be here. And it was very enlightening talk by Professor Narain and Ms. Bedi, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. So today I would like to share some of my experiences and learnings from an initiative of UNDP India, in which I was closely and deeply involved. So basically this initiative is known as Women Water Champions. This was an initiative by National Water Mission, Ministry of Jal Shakti, UNDP India, and in partnership with CV, Stockholm International Water Institute. So idea behind this initiative was to underscore the critical role of women in water conservation and management. We all know that women play critical roles in all aspects of water governance, yet they are visibly missing from the water dialogue. And this initiative asserts the same. So through this initiative, 41 women from the grassroots level were identified and recognized for their committed effort in the water sector. If I talk about the process that went into identifying the 41 women, we did a detailed and thorough process, which was followed by there were nominations received from various grassroots organizations, and we then shortlisted these nominations against a set criteria. We interviewed these women. We also got the testimonials to validate their work. And then finally, we selected 41 women. So these 41 champions, they are from different regions. They belong to remotest of the villages, and then there are many from the tribal belts as well. So covering different socioeconomic and educational backgrounds. So it covers around 14 to 15 states in India, and so their work mainly, so they are doing different kind of work. So it mainly range from mobilizing communities on water conservation, and then participating in water use efficiency programs, creating rainwater harvesting infrastructure, and then irrigation management, and also into agriculture productivity, restoration of groundwater, and other awareness building programs. And they were also very instrumental in leading water user groups. So their work highlights how these women not only secured their livelihoods and protected their communities, they often were seen to empowering other women in their communities. So that was the highlight of this work. So the selected 41 were promoted on social media at the national level and as well at some global events. They were also given a chance to speak at various platforms where they shared their stories with a wider audience. Um, talking about the impact of this initiative, we know that the examples of women as decision makers, water managers are very hard to come by. So this initiative helped us to recognize the different but valuable contribution that women everywhere can do, uh, everywhere can and do make to water management. So as part of the same initiative, various suitable platforms were made available for these champions to speak. Like there's a Water Talk initiative by Ministry of Jal Shakti. So they were invited by the ministry and they spoke in length about their initiatives they have done in their respective communities, and also their videos, and they were also personally like invited to some global events. I can say that it is a first step towards women empowerment. And of course, there is a lot more to be done, but this was just a first step. And if I talk about my personal learning in this whole process on a personal front, it has been a great learning experience for me to meet, interact, and interview these incredible 41 women champions and write their inspiring stories. So, all I can say that is knowing these women filled me with inspiration and set my belief even stronger on why we need women leadership in the water sector. So, under this initiative, a compendium has been developed that highlights their stories, 41 stories, and it was launched through an online event recently on 2nd June. It was together launched by CV, Ministry of Jal Shakti, and UNDP. This compendium documents the journey of 41 women who challenged water crisis and address the issues with their determination and courage. And in fact, sincere thanks goes to all the organizations, all the grassroots organizations who introduced these women and shared their stories with us. This compendium is available online, and I'll be sharing the link to access, and you can download this compendium. I'll be sharing it in the chat box. So I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vinni. I think it is indeed very inspiring. In fact, I had a chance to attend that session where the women shared their stories, and they are super inspiring stories from different parts of the country. So please, Vinni, it would be really nice if you could share it there, and it's a great work. So big round of applause for you as well for compiling these stories, because sometimes, we do a lot of work, but we don't document them. Documentation probably becomes equally important for larger audience to know. So we do have, so I'm opening up for questions now, and we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A section. I'm assuming that some of you would have seen that also. So I think that the first question is from Vishal Singh. So I will put it to Vishal on how existing water management infrastructure in India address gender equality issue, and how these infrastructures can be designed more gender friendly. So just Vishal, here I would also like you to reflect on the Jal Jeevan mission that is going on, where we are saying that rural water supply and how can engagement of women be brought in there as well to ensure sustainability of such projects.
Okay, so thank you, Vishal, for that question. Nice, provocative question with no easy, clear-cut answer. But this question we've dealt with on several occasions, also with Fawzia and Terry Sass. So when we did a series of management development programs where we were talking to engineers from the public health engineering department, from the drinking water utilities, and we said that normally we tend to be gender blind in the design of infrastructure. And one of the things that many feminists say and many gender specialists say is that all over the world, women use water structures designed by engineers who are predominantly men. And they say that, well, do those male engineers know what are the intricacies, what are the peculiarities and sensitivities of that infrastructure being used by women? Having said that, I think the way forward is to train water professionals differently. So, which means that you don't train a water professional simply to look at design, simply to look at infrastructure, but you sensitize a water professional to be aware of gender differences, and not just gender, but more broadly to look at social differentiation, so that as a water professional, as a water engineer, your task does not stop at laying down the infrastructure, at installing the pipes, but at looking at what the social differences are, and gender is just one of them, and how to factor that in while you are trying to improve the effectiveness of water service delivery. So some time ago, we were involved in an action research project where we got the village communities into dialogue with the PHED that was providing water. And what we found was that the women would not speak up. And they sat behind, again, I'm talking of Haryana, a very patriarchal society, like where Chandni was also talking about. And women sat behind separately with their faces wild in the last row. And then we had to arrange a separate meeting for the women to talk directly with the PhD. And I started thinking that if the PhD engineer were a woman, would things have been different? Would the village women have been, more forthcoming, more forthcoming in sharing their concerns? So I think maybe there are two ways to handle this. One is to consciously bring in more women in the water sector. That is one thing that's important, and many efforts now are on for that. I know Saki Waters is doing some work on those lines. The interdisciplinary programs that we have at Terry Sass, at Shivnada University, have more female enrollments than do conventional engineering programs, which produced India's, the large bulk of the previous generation of water engineers. So one is to bring in more women in the water sector. Other is to sensitize the water bureaucracy, sensitize engineers and the PhD in the drinking water utilities to look not only at gender, but more broadly to look at social difference. I think that would be my thoughts on this.
Thank you very much, Vishal. My next question would be to Chandni, and this question is again, while Vishal highlighted the peri-urban issues which are there, and a lot of projects that you have taken also is in the peri-urban sector. So when we look at Sohna, for instance, it's peri-urban Gurgaon where you have worked. So the question is that from your experience, are there any particular factors more relevant to understand in the context of peri-urban spaces? I mean to ask, do they differ significantly for peri-urban areas, or rural and peri-urban? You have to look at similar things.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vishal, for asking that question. Yes, like we've been talking about Johar Pujan in rural areas. Now, when we talk of specifically peri-urban areas where the agricultural land has been completely transformed and houses have been constructed and there are migrant population. Now, there the context of Johar Pujan is not really applicable. Their issues, their concerns are completely different. There are issues of sanitation, there are drainage problems. Drinking quality of water is not up to the mark. So these are some of the issues that women have been vocal about, specifically in the peri-urban areas. There have been issues of water thefts because it's a peri-urban area. There is no streamlined governance mechanism there to provide water to these communities. So people, they dig, submersibles which are illegal. So yeah, these are some of the issues which are very different from the rural when we talk about peri-urban areas.
So thank you, Chandni. There was one more question before I move to Mansi, was on the products that you are getting developed in your center, Unnati Center, which are being produced. What are the challenges that you face when it comes to marketing those products?
Yes, you just touched on the right pain point. There are challenges in marketing. This is something very, a very new initiative that we have started just 2 years back, because we started this stitching program as a hobby course for women, so that, when they stitch for themselves, they are, in a way, they are saving money. So our idea was to have access, encourage women to have access to money, access to resources. So this, as even as a hobby course, it helped them to start their savings and save for themselves, basically, so that they can have access to the resources. But then we realized that, now they are at a position where we really need to talk about income generation, and we really need to get more work for them. So we have created this online platform now very recently. And in times of pandemic, this has really helped us. Because while during Diwali, we used to put up a lot of stalls in the corporates, which is no more a situation anymore. So our way to market the products is basically online and digital platforms. At the same time, we also have B2B linkages. We partner with companies like Sonalika International Tractors for orders, so that women can get orders. We have partnered with NGOs in Spain who are social enterprises, and they give order on constant basis to women. So it is a continuous process, I would say. We keep exploring the partners, we keep exploring the clients and the customers. These days, for example, we got a lot of orders for masks, even from the district administration. So while on one hand, men had lost their jobs, women were earning because of this Unnati project. And they were supporting their households, which changed the whole narrative in a patriarchal society like Haryana, where mother-in-laws, they came forward and they said, in Hindi they said ki meri bahu ne mera ghar chalaya. So my daughter-in-law has actually helped to earn livelihood and run the house during this pandemic. So the appreciation, the recognition, the honor, things changed during this time. That's what we have witnessed. So yes, marketing, I would say, is a continuous process, challenging, but continuous.
Thank you, but I think you're doing very well in that. So that's phenomenal. And as rightly pointed out, even domestic helps also were telling the same thing, that their family members, that's women who are driving the households during the pandemic. So that's lovely. Mansi, over to you. You have a question. Huh?
Thank you, Fawzia, and hello everybody from IIT BHU. As usual, it was very inspiring, and thanks to meet Chandni virtually and listen to her. And hi, Vishal. My question is for Vishal, and it is a little bit offbeat of what we are talking today, and I'm discussing and also having curiosity on the very word gender itself. And we had a first Q&A in our session today, and I'm raising that point. Do you think we will be in a stage sometime soon when we also incorporate the discussion of LGBTQ in the gender discourse in water? Because somewhere the gender discourse of water has moved towards the women discourse in water, So I'm just curious, where do we stand as a discussion as well as in policy? Because they are also, in fact, more discriminated than women in terms of water, because they have an extra layer of social exclusion, from all facilities, the water being one of the key. Vishal, do you have any optimistic vision for us?
Yeah. Okay, so thank you. So I also noticed that, in the chat box, there was this question that these days the gender issue is confused with the LGBTQ issue. So I think that's quite unfortunate. Now, the thing is that when we think of gender studies, as a whole range, we look at all these differences. We look at the differences between men, women, we look at LGBTQ issues. But I'm currently doing a study for ISIMOD, which is on looking at gender equality and social inclusion in the curricula of the Himalayan University Consortium members. And as part of the study, I'm talking to a lot of faculty members who are part of the HUC. And one of the things I found, which echoes what was raised in the chat box, is that there's a lot of confusion between the words gender, gender identity, and sexual orientation. These are three different things. And I think conceptually, when we start teaching gender, we should start by explaining the differences across these words. So
you do that.
So gender, exactly. So gender is the social construct of whether you're a man or a woman. Gender identity is how you feel about yourself. Do you feel that you behave like a man? Do you feel that you behave like a woman? And sexual orientation is whom you're attracted to. So that is one. So I think that conceptual understanding is important. Having said that, yes, I think that we should be optimistic, because when we look at intersectionalities, there is one more level of complexity there. Yes. Now, the word transgender is a broad umbrella term, and it is used to describe any deviation from a gender binary, right? Okay. So I think that if you want to look at intersectionalities, then getting into these issues is intellectually, of course, rewarding and satisfying, but also has a lot of practical relevance, because, as you rightly said, that there's one more level of discrimination. There's one more layer of a social identity that underprivileges these groups of people. But I was happy to see that in the media there was recently a news item on COVID vaccinations for the transgenders, right? And I thought that was interesting, because now we're talking about that, because there's one more level of stigma there, there's one more level of marginalization there. And yes, I would be happy to see that progressively we can enhance our level of analysis to unravel this one more level of social differentiation, this one more level of stigmatization in access to water.
Thank you. I think
Thank you.
That was really good. So we have one more hand, and thanks, Mansi, for raising that question. So we have Anar Bhatt from the attendee who has raised her hand. Anar, would you like to speak up?
Thank you, Fawzia. So really interesting discussion on climate change, especially that I'm currently in the last phase of my PhD, where I've collected data on climate adaptation in one of the most remote areas of Kutch post-pandemic. And one interesting thing that comes up is, I'm looking at the adaptation policy and how the uptake works. So while in the design part, it is meant to be for women group, but when it comes to uptake, the adaptation is mostly, by men. And while we see that the most of information or, a lot of knowledge rests with women, especially the effect of climate change is felt more severely by them. They often lack the information, or the information on adaptation solutions available reach to them last. I just wanted to, get a sense of the panel's view or experiences on that, and especially how policy design versus practice, how, we, during design, it is envisioned that women should be the main beneficiary, but in practice it ends up being very different, which I'm sure is very common. But I'd really like to hear your views on that.
Thank you, Anar. So maybe first Vishal and then Chandni and Vinni, all of you can share your thought on this, because policies normally sort of say that they are gender neutral, but sometimes we get a feeling that they are gender blind. So your thoughts, Vishal, and then Chandni.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just reminded of my own field research experience in Mukteshwar, So what I found was that men are very good at talking about climate change, right? Maybe because they read about it in the newspaper, maybe because they hear the term, maybe they articulate it. But women don't talk about climate change like that. And I think and maybe that's just because women are busy adapting, are busy coping with things, right? So that is one. And I don't know how to explain this, but I think that women are very quick in coping with, in adapting to, in finding out, household survival strategies, livelihood strategies. but maybe they don't get that much space to talk or to articulate or to express how they're experiencing climate change. Also, there are many studies which show that men and women perceive climate change in different ways. And maybe again, that has to do with the gender-based division of labor on the fields and at home. So I mean, that's what I would share in terms of my experiences. Yes.
Thank you, Vishal. Chandni, over to you.
Yes. So in terms of policy and practice, I would say what we really need to do is bring in voices of women. Like we have adopted this design thinking approach where we empathize and, and we work separately both with men, women, and then try to bring their issues to the forefront. However, we have also seen that, there are changes that are happening on ground. There are Anganwadi workers and all of them, most of them, they're female workers and ANMs, they are now aware about these policies. They are aware about these issues, and we do connect with them to kind of, reach out to them, and they become the change agents, and they spread the awareness in the communities, which is now these days transforming, bringing out transformations and bringing out these changes.
Yeah, thank you, Chandni. Vinni, and then Vishal has raised his hand, so maybe I'll pass on to Vishal again. Vinni, you may have to unmute yourself.
Yes, sure. Ms. Bedi and Professor Narain are more skilled to answer this question, but I have a similar observation during my fieldwork I did in Lakhimpur Kheri, UP, where I met all the beneficiaries, and I had a similar observation, like when we are interacting with men and women in a common group, so men tend to speak more than women. But I have seen, like, when you speak to women in a separate group, so they come out more and they share their experiences. Otherwise, when there are men, so they are mainly dominated, and the men tend to speak more than women. So
thank you so much, Vinni. Yes, you are absolutely right. And over to you, Vishal.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add to this discussion. The other issue is how do you study climate change in the field? Now, climate change is a scientific term, and we read it in journals, and we publish papers in Global Environmental Change and Climate and Development. But the challenge also is that how do you figure out, how do you locate climate change while talking to men and women? And what I found was that rather than asking them, do you experience climate change, you have to listen to what they're telling you. And then you have to translate that into a scientific discourse. So in one of our projects, women said that when we were children, Diwali used to be in the winters. And now we experience Diwali in the summers, right? Now that means that basically the summer is getting longer. Now they will not say that climate change is happening. They say that अब हम दिवाली गर्मियों में ही मनाते हैं. जब दिवाली होती है गर्मी के कपड़े पहनने होते हैं. And then you have to interpret that in your own scientific discourse, that they're talking that now that when Diwali comes around November, October, it's still hot, right? And I could, when I was a child, I know that. I mean, I remember Diwali being around a very cold time. And now it's not like that. And that's what the women said. So you have to listen to what they're saying, listen to their narratives, and then you have to translate that into your scientific discourse.
Thank you so much. That's so beautiful, really put, Vishal, that we have to really look at, talk to them in the language that they understand, they speak, and they are able to articulate in, and then try to sort of, try to then convert it to your scientific language and reveal it or report it. There is a question from, I know from Mansi, but before that, I'll take a question from Professor Seshadri. I'll just take 5 minutes more, so I'll request all the panelists to please stay put. There are a lot of questions coming. So Professor Seshadri actually wants to know from Chandni specifically. So do you really look at old designs which have worked well, and you use them in your, in your projects or in your implementation projects that you have? Old designs, traditional designs, anything that has worked.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Seshadri, and good to see you here. Yes, we definitely work in a participatory way when we are designing. Our first project, which was the check dam that we had constructed, we went with the communities to the villages to find out what their traditional norms were and how, where should it, the check dam be constructed, how it should be designed. We worked very closely with community. And, that check dam was to be constructed in a place which is called Dev Bani. Now, Dev Bani, which was the adobe of ancestors, they were not allowed to cut trees. So while designing, we had to even keep that in mind. That when we are designing that check dam, not even a branch was to be cut, because the communities, they felt that if a branch is also cut from that area, some mishappening will happen at their houses. So we do look at not just the traditional designs. We went up with them to find out where the ravines are. We conducted transit walks, how it should be designed, but also keep in mind what are the cultural norms of that village. And today that land has really come up very well. And during rainy season, it is a treat to watch. And when we go back to the communities, they say, "Hamare purvajon ko pani mil gaya, hamare tript ho gaye purvaj." So these are the kind of remarks, the feedback that we get, and that is how these communities, they accepted these designs and the structures.
Yeah, very, very important to actually to leverage on the cultural connect that people have with water. There's the question that Mansi has actually put, probably some bit of it you had addressed in your presentation, sensitization for men. So do you really include a sensitization session for men as well?
This question is for me?
Yes, for you, yes.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We do have separate sessions for men and separate for women, because we realize that, and what we have been talking about, that when we have the combined sessions, women, they are not able to bring their issues to the forefront. So we do have separate sessions for men. We sensitize them on issues of gender. We sensitize them on issues of climate change. And that has been the reason why they have started taking ownership of their own villages. All the projects that we have done so far, they have taken the ownership, and they realize these issues. They realize these changes that are happening, and the impact that's happening when they say that "Pehle barish bahut aati thi, ab to barish hi nahi aati hai." Things like these. So yes, we do have separate sessions for them and sensitize them on issues like this. And we have seen how they've broken gender stereotype by tying pagri and giving recognition to women who worked on water. So that has been the result of year-long sensitization programs with men.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chandni. I think this discussion can just go on, and it's getting more and more interesting. But we are running short of time. As you rightly pointed out, that it's so important to look at the cultural context in which we are working. We cannot just say that somebody is not speaking up, because we need to understand why that person is not speaking up, or why that person is not getting involved. What is the social dynamics of that area? So we have to definitely go beyond technical and try to investigate these issues, because these are just not technocratic problems, but these are technological problems, but these are also social problems which are there, which we have to take into consideration when we are looking at water, and especially in the light of climate change. And I'll end this session, prior to that, of course, many thanks to Vishal and Chandni and Vinni and my whole team. Mansi and Vibhu, if you were able to join, I know you were very, very busy today, and Ganesh and Manisha, Megha, I'm trying to recollect all the names who have helped me in this, Vasanta, and everyone else, and of course Yogesh from IT, who has been here. Last time I withheld him, it was his wife's birthday on the Eigen Dialogue, Vishal, and he reached home at 10 p.m. So no gender equality was there, absolutely, that particular day. But yes, thank you everyone. And lastly, I would say promoting gender equality is not just the right thing to do, but it is the smart thing to do. And we should all come together to promote gender equality. Thank you very much for this great session. Our next session that is there is on Mansi has put it in the chat box, but I just put it here as well. It is on riverfront developments in India, and that's happening next Wednesday. Do join us next Wednesday again for another very, very invigorating dialogue. Thanks a lot, and have a nice evening. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you presenters for joining us today and enlightening us with your wisdom. Also, thank you all the participants for joining us and making the session interactive. We quickly take you through the citizens who make this collective: Vibhu Prasad Nayak, Fawzia Tarannum, Ganesh Shankar, myself Mansi Bal Bhargav, Rajiv Shah, Gautami Baviskar, Manisha Sharma, Megha Gupta, Srinivas M.R. and Basanta Subaya. We represent Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Hyderabad, Terry School of Advanced Studies, New Delhi, Environmental Design Consultants, Ahmedabad, FluxGen Sustainable Technologies, Bangalore, Counterview, and we are supported by Wiki's Water Resources Council. We truly appreciate your support and encouragement in conducting this series, and we hope that you will stay tuned with us through our social media platforms and our website, and you will write to us at our email IDs. Thank you once again to all of you. We look forward to having you in the next session. Please take care of yourself. Bye-bye.